Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. Giving you guys a huge shout out, all you creepy kids, for joining me tonight. I love it when y'all hang out with me. And tonight's a really good night because, as usual, I got a shit ton of creepy tales lined up for you guys. So I hope you're ready for that. Oh, and creepy and lined up. You know, that reminds me, have you checked out the Creepy Crate yet from the folks over at the lineup? See what I did there? How you like that? Oh, dude, you got to get on that. Y'all are missing out on some of the most bizarre and macabre memorabilia and collector's items ever. Our demented little friends over at the lineup have been rooting around in some crazy places, searching for spooky little trinkets and all these crazy little freebies for twisted folks just like us. And I'm taking advantage of it, and you should too. They love us here at the Southern Horror Queen Show. Giving us our own little $5 discount when we subscribe. So make sure you take advantage of that. Now, I don't know how they can afford to cram all of these creepy little prizes into a box and send them out to us at the already low prices that they're sending them out to us at. But they're also giving us this $5 off when we subscribe for our first crate. How is that possible? I have no idea. These guys are insane. They're crazier than me. That says a lot, right? So make sure you get up off of your little asses. Go to authorlyngibson.com. Look on the home page, and right there in the right-hand corner, you will see a little creepy crate icon. Click on that. Find out a little bit more about what's going on with the creepy crate, and subscribe there. And don't forget, when you go to check out, type in that cool little code, TWISTED, and you'll get an extra $5 off. That's crazy. Take advantage of it. I keep telling you guys, but you know, I don't know, y'all might be slacking or whatever the case may be. So anyway, now I've got my creepy crate shout out done for the evening. And I got to send out a big, wet, creepy chick kiss. Hey, Gavin, how are you, honey? Doing good. To all of the sponsors for the Adrian's Fury Dragster, of course, Edge Radio. Got to be tuning into the Edge Radio. Oh my God, the tunes are awesome. If I can listen to it all day long and not get bored, you guys can too. Crazy tunes, very few commercials in the planning. So, man, it's just good listening. So check us out at theedgeradio.us. And the links for the station are on my page and Big Johnny Blender's page. And I'll put them back up after the show as well, so you guys can click on those. Also want to give a big shout out to Renegade Racing Fuel, D&M Graphics, Surreal Studios, Racers Direct, RJS, Pro Lube, Kentucky Gentleman Cigars, Hawaiian Island Shine, and of course, my buddies, Naked Wines. Yes, indeed, boy. I put a hurting on these Naked Wines, too. I'm telling you, that's some good stuff right there. Yummy. That would go perfect with some of Susie Jones's fudge. So anyway, I got to spend the afternoon with Susie and Mike, and it was just awesome that they came down. Enjoyed chilling with them. She's another little creepy chick just like us, so hey, you gotta love Susie. I'm sure she'll be chiming in here in a minute, unless traffic was just insane going back to Florida. So I wanted to tell you guys about something that happened to me right before I left to go to Pensacon, week before last, I think. I don't know, my days get all screwed up. I'm old and I'm foul, and it happens. But there was a local book club that wanted to review Wicked Truth, which, of course, is one of the books that I've written. It was just recently published and starting to make its way out there into the public eye. Well, I got my report back over the weekend, and it seemed like everybody loved the storyline. Everybody loved the research that was put into it. Everybody loved everything about the book, with the exception of one person. So this really happened, and I wanted to share this with you guys. Check this out. This is crazy, right? So the lady brings the book back to the lady that's the head of the book club, and tells her that she cannot keep this book in her house. She took the book to her priest and had her priest bless it, and she sent it back to me as so in a bag. Check it out. There's things in the bag. Of course, my book came back with it. So Wicked Truth, slightly used, maybe a good discount on that. Inside of the book, she's left me a couple of prayers that she reads. And hey, that's cool. Everybody prays. I pray every night. Dear God, I have to pray. Anyway, that's not all though, but wait, there's more. She also sent a prayer book. Mind you, this is on top of the book being blessed. You got to love that. Hey, Rhonda, check this out. I was just getting started, so make sure you rewind just a little bit when you get a chance. This is about Wicked Truth, which your mother's reading. So also besides the prayers and the prayer book and having the book blessed, she sends it back with a crucifix. I'm still digging in the bag, y'all. It gets better. And a bottle of holy water. So she didn't care too much for Wicked Truth, apparently. However, like I told you guys a couple weeks ago, I've actually had a priest read this book, and the priest loved it, did not deny anything that was in it, and actually made the comment that my knowledge on ancient scriptures was at a priest level. So my reaction to this, of course, I thought it was freaking awesome that somebody had to go have my book blessed and send the holy water and all that stuff back. That's crazy. But in my mind, this lady did the right thing, because in her mind, if she was perceiving the book to be negative, it could have very well drawn negativity to it. So she did the right thing. I'm not hating or anything like that. And hey, thanks for the prayer books. That's awesome, because, you know, at times we do need those, especially when the masks start getting crazy behind me. But I just thought I would share that with you guys. And of course, myself and the new publisher will be exploiting the hell out of it. So the book's so bad it had to be exorcised and sent back to the author. Madness! Gotta love it. Anyway, a day in my world, folks. So I wanted to share that with you guys, and think about it for a little while and give me your feedback. I'm curious to understand or to know what you guys think about it. Rhonda, I hope everything's drying up over there in Kentucky. I'll need to get cleaned up before we get back up there, because I thought it was our job down here in Louisiana not to flood, not you guys, right? So anyway, like I said, I wanted to share that. But I just wanted to tell you to keep your eyes open for Wicked Truth, to be in the news headlines, because I'm pretty much expecting all the locals to start picketing and burning crosses in my yard pretty much at any moment now. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure it'll happen. Hey, Daniel Hall, good to see you, my honey. Daniel creates knives. He's freaking killer. I did it again. How you like that, Daniel? So, all right, we're going to get our scary on in just a minute, because you guys have something that you're obligated to do before I get my scary on. You've got to get up, lock the doors, kick out the damn kids, and turn the lights off and grab a tasty adult beverage of your own, because it is now time to get your scary on. Hey, Ricky Vance, good to see you tonight. Thanks for joining in with all of us creepy kids. I'm going to look for the book. It is on Amazon right now, so check that out, Gavin. It will blow your mind, that's for certain. Naked Wines, folks, good stuff. Okay. So tonight we're starting out with all kinds of creepy crazy. Broadcast is tagging will have to view later. Okay, that's cool. So have you ever heard of the Radiant Boys? No, it's not some lame-ass boy band wannabes. Y'all know me better than that by now. I don't go there. The Radiant Boys are these child ghosts that actually originate from German lore. Here's the kicker. These glowing child spirits are said to be the lingering souls of kids that were murdered by their own mothers or stepmothers. And back in the day, these legends originated. It was kind of a fairly common occurrence. So When I first started my research on the Radiant Boys, I was thinking, were these women insane or something to kill their own kids? Yeah, well, that may have been the case in a few of these events. However, it wasn't the most common of reasons. Desperation was a huge motivating factor back there. Hey, Ronnie and Lori, glad to see you guys. People get desperate. They plot to murder their own children. Some serious shit's going down, right? So sometimes it was done to avoid the shame of bearing a child out of wedlock. But most of the time, sadly enough, it was because the parents could not take on another mouth to feed. So there were these other situations, though, when greed was a factor. Some of these poor kids were offed by their tramp mama just so she could hold on to the money. So, back in the 1700s, if the dude died and he still had living kids from a previous marriage, they were the ones that were going to inherit the estate, not the widow. So as you can imagine, a lot of stepmothers started offing those kids, right? It was so common in this era, in fact, that two very well-known fairy tales are based off of these circumstances. I know you've heard of Hansel and Gretel and, of course, Sleeping Beauty. That's right. So anyway, the Radiant Boys, which were once known in German legend as Kindermorderin, yeah, that's a mouthful, right? They're most commonly seen in Germany, somewhere around in Cumberland and Northumberland in England as well, because that's where the German immigrants settled down and they shared their beliefs and legends with the locals there. So it kind of rubbed off on them, right? Kind of like voodoo and hoodoo in New Orleans. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit more about these creepy kids. So they're said to show up half naked, and they glow so bright that they look like they're on fire. Now, they appear in full form, but they don't stick around for very long, only for a second or so before they disappear into thin air. Here's the kicker, though, ghost hunters. Do not go looking for these ghostly little kids. Now, y'all know that I'm into ghost hunting and paranormal research, but there's a little bit something more to these Radiant Boys. These little bastards are known as harbingers of doom. The upside of the encounter means that you're going to stumble onto some wealth or good luck, and you're going to become extremely successful. But of course, the downside, yes, there's a downside. You're going to die a violent death as soon as you make it to the top. So yeah, don't go chasing after these little bastards. They're bad news, right? So anyway, I ran across a ton of documented encounters with these evil little bastards. But I think the coolest of them all was this one about an Englishman that was known as Captain Robert Stewart and his encounter with a Radiant Boy. Captain Stewart was on this hunting trip in Ireland, and he's out in the woods stumbling around, probably took a bottle of Johnny Blender's moonshine out there with him. And, well, soon enough, it got dark, and he was lost as hell. And, what do you do when you're in the woods and you're drunk and you're lost and apparently you're not getting any game? You start wandering around. Well, this dude wanders around, and he stumbles up on this house. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's obviously somebody's home. So he goes and he knocks on the door, and he's hoping he can rent a room for the evening or something. But the owner already had a house full of guests, even though he's out in the middle of nothing. He goes ahead and he invites the captain inside, and he tells his servant to go and make room for him somewhere. So the servant leads him to this big room in the back of the house that appeared to have been neglected for a really long time. Now, after the servant lights a massive fire in the fireplace, he leaves the captain alone to rest for the night. So Stewart was so exhausted that he fell asleep immediately, but he wakes up a few hours later because there's this bright, blaring light in the room with him. So he's half awake, and he rolls over, and he's thinking, well, maybe it's coming from the fireplace, right? So he rolls over, looks in the fireplace, and he sees that the fire had long since gone out. There was nothing there but a few embers and some coal. So he's like, where the hell is all this light coming from? And he rolls back over and he looks straight up above him. And guess what the dude sees there? it's this glowing ghost boy that's hovering above him. It's just floating there in midair, staring straight at him. And then all of a sudden it disappears. Hey, Doug Smith, aloha, honey. So apparently Stuart was really freaking tired because in the story, it doesn't say anything about him freaking out and hauling ass or anything like that. The legend picks back up the next morning when he's leaving. So the captain must have had some brass balls, right? Anyway, he mentions the ghost boy to the owner as he's leaving the house. And the owner immediately calls for that servant that took him back to that back room. And he asked him, well, the servant admitted that he had led Stuart to the haunted room, but he defended himself by saying that he lit a big enough fire in the hearth to keep that ghost away. Apparently not. So the owner becomes furious. And then he starts explaining to Stuart that the room had been off limits because it was haunted by the ghost of one of his ancestors that had been murdered there by his demented mother. So he then warned Stuart that when the ghost appeared, it usually meant that the guy who saw it was going to rise to great power and then die a violent death. So Captain laughs it off and he goes on his way. Well, shortly after he gets home from this hunting trip, Stuart becomes the Viscount Castlerock because his older brother suddenly died in this horrible and mysterious accident, right? So he then left the military and he became involved in politics, in which he did quite well. He actually served as the British Foreign Secretary during the Napoleonic Wars. And he also served as the leader of the House of Commons. So he'd been successful in climbing up the ranks, but don't think that means he was well liked because, in fact, he was quite unpopular. So Stuart struggles for several years through the stress of this demanding position that he's in, and eventually he starts losing his mind. So in 1822, he commits suicide by cutting his own throat. So therefore, hey, you were warned, dude. You saw the radiant boy. You were told you were going to rise to power. You did that immediately. You were told you were going to die a violent death, and you made that come true yourself. So anyway, the captain's fate was just like a whole bunch of other folks that ran across one of these wicked little bastards. But then there's this one other radiant boy legend called the Blue Boy. Very popular legend, very well-known legend. Hey, Susie, I'm here. I don't know why you can't find me. Brandon Vale, nice to see you joining me tonight, honey. So, like I was talking about, the Blue Boy. Now, this kid wasn't actually murdered by his mother. His death was way far worse than that. Legend states that the boy was caught with some documents that were given to him by the aristocrat that owned Chillingham Castle. Now, these documents were supposed to be given to the Spanish Armada to help them defeat the English. So, as you've already figured out, the documents never made it out of the castle, and the boy was walled up inside a passageway while he was still alive. How do we know that? It's good right here, folks. Besides a near century's worth of ghost sightings of this little dude, in the 1920s, the owners at that time were having a lot of renovations and repairs done. And guess what they find? Yeah, this kid's bones were discovered blocked up behind a wall, and there were still shards of the blue fabric from his clothes clinging to his bones. The tips of this little dude's finger bones were missing, and that's a pretty good indication that the kid tried to claw himself out of that wall. Now, everybody at that point came to understand why there had been so many reportings of this little ghost boy popping up. The claims were all fairly similar, too. These folks said that at the stroke of midnight, you could hear this kid screaming and crying, and his cries would just echo down these stone passageways. And adjacent to the wall where this little boy was walled up in and allowed to die is a room called the Pink Room. And reports said that when the last of the blue boy's cries start to fade away, this bright halo of light appears near the four-poster bed in the Pink Room. And if you're lucky enough to be the one sleeping in that bed, you're going to see the ghost of a small boy dressed in blue illuminated by a halo of light. Now, Blue Boy is said to approach the bed and stare down whoever the hell's laying there, but only for a second. He then walks away and he disappears into the very wall that he was buried behind. So that leads us to the next bit of madness for the evening. I couldn't pass it up. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about some haunted relics, and I know you remember, Gavin. We were talking about one of the paintings, and this painting, it was the Anguish Man painting. It was brought to Chillingham Castle to try to be used, I guess, as an intermediary in between the spirits there to try to communicate with them. And one of the resident spirits of Chillingham Castle, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, pitched a royal bitch fit and started slamming stuff around. This is the same castle. That's why I wanted to go back a couple weeks later, which is now, and tell you guys a little bit more about Chillingham Castle. Check it out. So this castle's been around since 1298. At first it was a monastery. Then in 1344, it actually became a fortified castle. And that, at that point, that's 719 years, y'all. So y'all know there's some haunted madness going on in there, right? Well, this castle was actually intended to be the first line of defense in keeping the Scots from invading England. This was back in the day of William Wallace, when the castle was ruled over by King Edward I. So that right there should tell you there's some crazy shit going on in that castle. So, of course, I'm going to tell you about it. That's kind of what I do here, right? So let's start with the bottom and work our way back up, shall we? So, as with most ancient castles, of course there's a dungeon at Chillingham. Oh, yeah. The Chillingham dungeon is a very small room that was carved from out of the base of the stone there in that mountain. Today, you can actually walk in there and see the etchings in the walls where the prisoners kept count of the days that they had remaining before the executioner came for them. Now, most of these folks that were slammed down there in the dungeon pretty much expected to have both their arms and legs cut off, or at least broken, and then be thrown down a 20-foot hole where they'd be left to starve to death or bleed to death. That's if they didn't die from the injuries that they sustained during the fall. Those that did survive the fall were said to sometimes eat the dead flesh from other bodies down there in the bottom of that pit. And some of them would even eat chunks of their own flesh in a desperate attempt to prolong their own miserable little lives. So today there's a steel grate that covers the opening of the hole. And it's said that if you look down into that deep, dark hole, that the face of a young woman will appear to you. Now, this was the last person that was killed here, but I can't find any explanation as to who she was or why she was being punished. All I was able to find out for sure was that she did live for 3 days down in that hole before she finally succumbed to her injuries. Hey, Susie, I see you guys made it home safe. I'm glad. I was talking about you earlier. So next up after the dungeon, of course, the other goodie that's in Chillingham Castle is the torture chamber. My husband would refer to that as the kitchen. Anyway, the torture chamber, yeah, it's on. There are some sick and deranged pieces of equipment in this room, y'all. And a lot of them are still in working condition today. This sucker is packed down and built for nothing other than pain and torment. The floor, when they engineered it, was carved from the stone base as well, and actually has a slight slope to it. So when they were torturing people, all the blood would run in one direction and drain out. So, you know, they didn't have to get their feet dirty too. There's also this huge boiling pot. There's implements for gouging out somebody's eyeballs. And there's these barrels. I want one of these barrels to go up here in the girl cave. I think they're freaking awesome. Well, you open these barrels up and they're lined with metal spikes on the inside. So what they would do is they would stuff a prisoner inside of these barrels, close the barrel up, and roll it around until it just stabbed them to death. And then they'd leave them in there and let them bleed to death, and eventually they'd have to rip their bodies out of the spikes for the next guy. But that was pretty bizarre, even if you ask me. But then, talking about bizarre, hey Glenn, speaking of bizarre, Glenn Spillman from Sports Insider, Movie Lovers Unite magazine, and Stellar 13 Films. My boy's got 99 irons in the fire, and he's keeping them all hot, y'all. So anyway, these other little creepy gadgets, I don't know, I may need one of those to hang in here too. They make a nice conversation piece. They're these freaky looking little cages. And guess what these twisted bastards would do with them? They would take these cages and put a starving rabid rat inside of them and then attach the cage to the prisoners. And the rat really had no choice but to eat its way out. What the hell is it that you had to do to get that kind of punishment? That had to be some mad shit right there, right? So anyway, I thought that was kind of bizarre. But don't you think that would make a great conversation piece? Maybe put a little candelabra inside of it or something. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, what kind of twisted freaking half-breed could think of this kind of madness, much less see it through? I'll tell you the dude's name, but you might remember it from the show a couple of weeks ago we were just talking about. His name was John Sage. So Sage was one of the king's most brutal warriors in the battlefield, and he worked his way up to lieutenant. But one day while he's out there in the battlefield, his leg gets injured so bad that it pretty much ended his days of fighting the king's wars for him. Well, Sage, bloodthirsty bastard that he was, goes to the king and he begs him just to keep me on in some position. It doesn't matter. Just keep me on in somewhere here with the castle. I want to be your badass still. So the king was pretty familiar with his tactics in battle, and he knew he was a fairly vicious old bastard. So his hatred for the Scots would also be a pretty good benefit for him at that time too. So he named Sage the Castle Torturer. And Sage loved it. In fact, he reveled in it. And he was so into his new job that he started creating torture devices of his own. And that answers the question of what kind of twisted half-breed mind. His name was John Sage. So some of the things that this dude did to these prisoners are freaking unfathomable. Even to me. That says a lot, right? So Sage would torture 50 or more prisoners a week for the entire time that he held his position there in the dungeon. Now, every one of these victims was used as a guinea pig to test and help him improve his latest means of torment. Sage thoroughly lavished in his torturing, but as all good things do, it soon came to an end. The war with the Scots was pretty much over, and his supply of prisoners started to dwindle down to pretty much nothing. So he's furious, and he's having fits, and they're talking peace, and he's like, oh, no, not that. He was mental unstable. He was mental something, Gavin. You're right there. But anyway, this dude, because he's running low on prisoners, he decides he's going to storm into the surrounding towns, and he just starts murdering anybody and everybody that he even suspected to be of Scottish descent. And when he returned to the castle, he was only even more infuriated when he heard people talking about freeing these prisoners. So, yeah, that went over like a fart in Sunday school there. He was not up for that. So Sage decided he was going to take care of things in his own way. Nobody was getting released from anywhere. So he rounds up all the men, all the women, and all the children, the older children, from these hordes of prisoners, and he leads them out to the courtyard where there's this huge bonfire burning. They weren't going to make s'mores, I assure you. Hello, my sweetness, Freddie. I missed you, honey. Hey, Martin, good to see you too. So Sage has all of these prisoners tied up and thrown into this massive fire. There were hundreds of them that were burned to death. And guess what was just within eyesight of this massive fire? There was a window. And in fact, it was the window to the Edward room where all of the prisoners' younger children were being held. So no doubt the ones that were tall enough to see out of that window were watching on as their parents died agonizing deaths. And even those that couldn't see through the window surely heard the screams, and I'm certain they smelled burning flesh. So, hey, Ricky, good to see you. Let's see. So you would think, hang on, kids, Uncle John will be there shortly to console you, right? Not so much. Sage was a battle-hardened soldier, and he knew that if he let those children go and let them grow up, that eventually when they were adults, they would come for their revenge, and he'd be an old man by then. So this evil bastard takes a small axe to the Edward room, and he starts hacking these kids to pieces. Now, these kids ranged from maybe 8 years old all the way down to infants. This bastard's heinous acts rendered the Edward room one of the most paranormally active rooms in the entire castle. You think there's a little reason behind that. Some of the things that happened in this room are the chandelier. It's said to just all of a sudden out of nowhere start swinging back and forth, I guess from all that random energy that's still there today. Also, the room is reported to have a foul smell and, of course, a very strange atmosphere. So people have also reported seeing these glowing orbs, and, of course, the faces of some of these terrified children are often caught on film. And a lot of times, their tormented screams and are very frequently heard and recorded by people who visit that room. So anyway, let's get back to Sage. We'll lighten it up with the mental case, as Gavin says. So in the torture chamber, there's this torture rack. And remember, we've talked about these. We did a whole episode on different types of torture devices and torture methods. That was pretty crazy, right? I know, just a friendly neighborhood creepy chick here. Anyway, this torture rack was one of the kind where the victim is tied down and he's stretched from limb to limb, and sometimes even his neck was stretched. It just depended, I guess, on what kind of mood the dude was in, right? So, of course, if he's playing with some kind of rack like this, you know this sick bastard has got some kind of freakish sexual fetishes, right? Yeah, because why wouldn't he? Anyway, so one day he's got his girlfriend strapped up to the rack and they're getting their freak on, and well, he starts cranking those gears on that torture rack and he accidentally winds up killing his old lady. I hope that was some good shit right there, because that was the last he got from her, I guess. I mean, you never know. The dude was definitely deranged. Anyway, but let me tell you about the girlfriend's father, who just happened to be a member of the Border Reivers. Now, the Reivers were a badass gang of broken men and outlaws that were pretty much as demented as Sage. So, needless to say, Dad wanted Sage dead right then and right there. So, the Border Reivers, like I said, were a very powerful organization. They had some very vast and skilled fighting forces behind them as well. So legend says that there was a meeting between King Edward and the leaders of the Border Reivers, Dad included, and King Edward was to have Sage killed immediately, else the Reivers were going to join up with the Scots and launch a full-scale attack on the castle. Well, the king didn't want that, right? So King Edward has Sage hanged in front of this massive crowd that's all gathered to see it. They saw their popcorn and turkey legs or whatever the case may be, because nobody liked this sick bastard. I'm sure everybody was just ecstatic to see him be tormented and killed right there. So, like I said, Sage was pretty much hated and feared by everybody in the surrounding areas. So these people in the crowd, I guess they decided to get their sick and demented on too. And they all decided they wanted some souvenirs, and I don't mean t-shirts. They start cutting chunks of flesh from out of Sage's body while he was still alive and hanging there. I don't know how long Sage hung there while he was being mutilated before he finally died, But after knowing what I do know about him, I'd say that was a pretty fitting end, wouldn't you guys? So Sage, he actually stuck around, and he's still seen pretty much all over the castle grounds, and of course, in his favorite spot, the torture chamber. Because as we know, ghosts always return to the places that they love the most, right? So next up in Chillingham Castle is a spot they call the Great Hall, which leads to the chapel and the minstrels gallery. Now let me clarify here. The minstrels gallery is not a room full of PMSing women. This is where the musicians perform. Okay, so back to the Great Hall. The Great Hall is described as a really long room with a lot of artifacts on the walls. And the most notable are this tapestry, which if you stand around it or somewhere adjacent to it, you'll start noticing cold spots. And the other thing that's pretty prominent there is a skull that is known to move all around the Great Hall on its own, but it never leaves the room. Now, on the opposite side, where all these artifacts are lined up on the wall, is a wall of windows. And those windows face the courtyard. And a lot of people have claimed to have spotted the faces of children staring in the windows from the courtyard into the Grand Hall. So there was actually one investigation where this small ghost boy was photographed in a chair sitting to the left of the skull. And I think I've posted that in a blog before. It's really stunning because it's a very vivid photo. You can see the child's facial features, the details of his clothes, but he's only like from the lap up. You can't see his legs, if I remember correctly, but you can even see his little hands on the side of the chair on the arms. So the minstrels gallery is a balcony that overlooks the tea room. Now, a lot of people have been pushed down the stairs here, and other folks have been overcome by violent waves of nausea or stabbing pains in their head while they're in this gallery. Kind of like PMS, right? Anyway, there's a legend that says when the tea room was being excavated, this massive toad-like creature breaks through the wall and he takes on human form and then he hauls ass and disappears. Well, the legends say that whatever that critter is, he's the dude that's haunting that area right there. And he's said to cause all kind of chaos. Now, the chapel, could you imagine the chapel? I am certain that there have been all kinds of crazy, jacked up prayers that have happened there. Because think about it. These soldiers are going there and they're praying for their safety and their family's safety while they're gone. But they know in the back of their minds they're fixing to pull their swords and start hacking people up the second they get to the battlefront, right? Imagine, how do you pray when you know you're fixing to go and kill and torture a shit ton of the Scottish? Well, anyway, these walls in the chapel are covered with different types of weapons of war and the flags that the king's men would carry out into battle. The chapel was also recently excavated, and beneath the floorboards, they found a bunch of different relics and some human bones. So maybe that would have something to do with the fact that cameras and recorders will not work in the chapel. And most of the time, batteries are drained completely before there's even a chance to use the equipment. And some of the times, the equipment just won't work at all. So, don't you think it's about time for the public or the producers to stick a commercial in? This is a cue for the producers to stick a commercial in. Hey, Kim, good to see you, honey. So, next up, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, the Edward Room, or more affectionately known as the Killing Room. Among the decor there's this suit of armor that's bearing a two-handed sword. And sometimes there's this light orb that seems to emanate from out of the armor and float kind of where the faceplate is, but it doesn't ever have any distinguished features to it. It's just a light orb. Now, the walls are also covered with other types of war weapons and cow horns and flags, and the most notable relic hanging on display in the Edward Room are the documents that were found with the blue boy when he was discovered buried inside that wall. How crazy is that, y'all? Can you imagine how haunted it is? So we already talked about the blue boy. So let's kind of creep on to some of the other ghosts that can be frequently seen around the castle there. Now, one in particular is Lady Mary Berkeley. She's known to wander around the corridors searching for her wayward husband, Lord Grey, who actually ran off with her sister. I'm betting she's still looking to kick some ass. Folks say that when you run up on Lady Berkeley, she doesn't have a whole lot to say, but she definitely sends a chill up your spine when she's hanging around. Now, there's this other lady ghost that's some ancestor to the Grey family. She's been seen stepping out of her own paintings there and following people around the castle. There's documents of her having done this since the Tankervilles inhabited this castle. She was seen by all of the children there and their nursemaid. And sometimes this unnamed lady is seen walking around on the grounds throughout the castle and is often mistaken for a tour guide that's wearing period dress. So as a descendant of the Tankervilles, Lady Leonora, who lived in the castle in the 1920s, she's got some pretty interesting stories to tell. She left behind this comprehensive journal of all of her ghostly encounters there. But her whole thing starts off as a precognition. While she was living in Italy, she had this dream that she was walking around this long avenue and towards this beautiful castle. And as she neared the parkway there, she was joined by this handsome young man that introduced himself to her as her husband-to-be's brother. And he explained to her that he needed to walk with her until his brother was ready. So at that time, she'd never even heard of Chillingham. And she had just only met her husband-to-be a couple of months ago and really had no idea where he was from, who he really was, much less anything about a castle or anything that had to do with her winding up marrying this dude. The last thing on her freaking mind, right? So as time passes, she actually finds herself at this castle from her dream. And while she's there, she's looking through family photos, and immediately she points this young man out in the photo, and she tells her soon-to-be husband about her visit that she'd had from him in a dream, told him about the whole conversation and all that stuff. Well, it was at that point that the brother, or the husband-to-be, told her that the brother had been killed in battle a very long time ago, way before her dream ever even transpired. So the first ghost that Lady Leonora encountered had nothing to do with any of the ancient specters that had been known for centuries to haunt this place. It actually happened one night while she's standing at her dressing table and she's brushing her hair. And she was only wearing her long nightgown. Well, all of a sudden she feels like somebody's standing behind her. So she turns around to see who it is, and she sees this young soldier there. Well, it was somebody that she and her husband knew, and they were aware that he had been very ill there recently. So she was kind of surprised to see him standing there and wondering what the hell was going on. Well, beside the fact that she was shocked that he was sick and there had come up the stairs to scare the hell out of her, she realized that she's half naked because a long nightgown at that time, I guess she considered herself half naked. Anyway, she freaks out. She turns around and grabs her dressing robe and holds it up to her, and she turns back around to confront him about, why in the hell are you in my bedchambers at night? I'm in here half naked. Well, when she turns around, he was gone. So she's really freaking the hell out. She throws her robe on or whatever, and she starts heading down the stairs. Well, she gets about halfway down the stairs, and her husband's coming up the stairs. And as they meet, her husband informs her that their friend, this young soldier, which she had just had an encounter with, had just passed away. So I guess that was his way of coming to say goodbye before he actually said goodbye. So at this point, like I said, she's seen many different ghosts there. That was one of them. But there was this one, this is very interesting too. She was doing some stuff around the castle one morning, and she just decided she was going to sit down and rest. And if I'm not mistaken, she sat down in the Great Hall, and that's where all of this stuff transpired, or at least where she was sitting at that time. Well, she settled down, and she's looking out the window, and the sky's getting dark. There's a big storm brewing, and all of a sudden she sees this woman appear out on the grounds in what she referred to as the garb of a Dominican. So she watches on, and she sees this woman kneel down to pray. And when she stood up, this man comes, and he walks up to her and stands beside her. And all of a sudden, these two of them start looking off into the horizon, which in their era would have been the direction of where their enemies would come from, the Scots, of course. So a few feet behind those two apparitions, these two more men appear, and they're wearing these velvet court dresses, or dress from the time of Henry VIII or thereabouts. So a few minutes later, the chambermaid physically comes into the Great Hall, and Leonora kind of looks away, and she figures, well, she's broken eye contact with these apparitions, that surely this vision's not going to be there when she turns back around. Well, it was. So she looked back out the window, and she sees that the woman has stood up, and another woman has walked behind her and covers her with a cape. And the man was now wearing a surcoat over the clothes that he was originally out there in. So she says at this point that she calls out to him, and she asked him, "What can I do to help you?" And there was no response. They didn't acknowledge her. So again, she called out to him, "What can I do to help you?" The man turned toward her and looked directly at her. He was wearing the garb of the French from 4 centuries prior, and his face was the exact same face of her husband's. So during this entire vision, she felt like she was about to witness some historical event. But as it was, she was reliving an exact moment from the past as what was on a near horizon for her. Well, immediately thereafter, the official directors came to visit the castle, and they came bearing a warning that they were about to be invaded. Ricky Vance said, "Sorry, I had to get one of my snakes out of the shower with my wife." That's freaking awesome. I might have to borrow one and put it in there with my husband. I don't think he would appreciate that shit at all. I like snakes, though. So anyway, in the library, there's also a couple of ghosts that can be seen there as well. But the most interesting or the most entertaining of those ghosts are 2 men that can be heard talking, and they're in a very in-depth conversation. It sounds like from what documentation there is that they're actually planning some kind of battle, and you can hear them positioning men or positioning their men and munitions or whatever the case may be. Hey, Lawrence, I've been missing you, sweetheart. So if you just happen to be in the library and all of a sudden you start hearing these voices, and you know good and damn well there's nobody else in there with you, if you stop what you're doing to concentrate on what's being said by voices, they'll stop. So you have to keep doing whatever you're doing for them to continue talking. Maybe keep flipping through a book or something and keep the EVP equipment going. Anyway, there is another spirit, and this is kind of interesting as well. This is what they call the white pantry ghost. So back in the day, there was what was known as an inner pantry, and this is where all the silver and the fancy goblets and, you know, all the gold and stuff like that was kind of stored. And if it was a fully staffed and functional castle, there was always a guard locked into the inner pantry to guard whatever was in there overnight. And this guard, like I said, would have no way in, no way out. So somebody come let his ass out in the morning so he can go and do whatever he needed to do in the morning, get his coffee or, you know, whatever. But anyway, this one guard was woke up one night by what he described as a woman that was wearing white, and she was desperately begging him for water. So he's half punch drunk and trying to wake up and figure out what in the hell is she jabbering about. She wants freaking water or whatever. So he gets up and he has all intentions on going and get her water. And he realizes, I'm locked up in here. I can't go get her any water. And by the way, how the hell did she get in here with me? So he turns around to confront her and ask her, what the hell are you doing in the pantry with me? And of course, she's gone, right? Well, the footnote here is that back in the day, whatever it was that they were using to poison people would cause an insatiable thirst, a craving for water. So that was usually a telltale sign that somebody had been poisoned, someone had been murdered. Now, also on the castle grounds is this picturesque and peaceful looking lake, and just somewhere where you want to go drop a hook and pop a beer open or whatever. Not so much. Beneath the pristine surface of this water lies the remains of thousands of Scots that were killed during the war with the English. Their corpses would be piled high onto these wooden carts, and then they'd be emptied out into this lake. And legend has it that the water is cursed. And if you put your hand in it, the spirits that are there beneath that water surface will pull your ass in, and it's a party, right? Nobody wants that. Hey, darling, good to see you. All right, so today, and still ongoing, the castle is presently being restored. There's some new owners, and of course, they've taken on a tremendous job, to say the least, but nobody really knows what will be discovered while these excavations and repairs are going on. There have been several earlier attempts to restore the castle, and of course, they're always stumbling onto stuff. This one particular time, a couple of workmen discovered two skeletons, and the bones were of a full-grown man and looked like a small boy. And I guess what they have figured out happened there is that these two guys had a hiding spot behind some trap door or something, and they climbed in there during a border reavers attack and accidentally locked themselves in. And apparently nobody knew they were there. And apparently their hiding spot was a damn good one, because nobody ever found them until, 700 years later. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Good evening to you too, honey. So workmen have also discovered small chambers in the lower dungeons. And when they open, there's Big Johnny Blender behind me, like it's not spooky enough up here. What do you want? Oh, you're coming to join me, huh? Okay. So, like I was talking about, small chamber down in the lower dungeons was discovered. And this was cool. I really wish that they would have been able to document this. But when they open the wall up, they find this perfectly preserved body of a man that's just sitting in the chair. And unfortunately, within just a couple of minutes, the cavity filled with fresh air and the body just withered away to ashes. So there's so many different ghosts at this castle that there's actually an on-site paranormal investigation staff. I shit you not. It's no wonder why either, because its castle's been around for so long, and there were so many bad things that happened there. So many people that lost their lives, and maybe just lost their lives in battle and were dumped there as well. Like we were talking about that pristine little lake, right? So even in-house with the family and the royal staff that lived there, there were a record 18 knights that were had some issues. Could you imagine 18 knights being in there that serious freaking egos and coming home all jacked up on testosterone from how many Scots' throats they cut? There were actually 8 executions within the family itself that was there. And these were some pretty brutal events. Some of them were hanged. Some of them were drawn and quartered. Some of them got both. As a matter of fact, while some of them were still alive, they would be cut down from the gallows to have their entrails removed. And as if that wasn't bad enough, before their heart beat for the last time, their bodies was cut into pieces. And then their heads were cut off and, of course, hung on the city gates to serve as a warning to others. The luckiest of those executed within the family simply had their heads cut off. They got off easy, right? Big Johnny Blender's holding his hands up. Yes, Big Johnny Blender.
I choose not that way for death.
Okay. We wouldn't do that. I hate to mess up. That's just too much mess to clean up, honey. So anyway, that's about a wrap for the evening. I'm glad you creepy kids joined me tonight. Hey, John Anderson, miss you, honey. Get that man a freaking cheeseburger. Anyway, check me out next Tuesday. My blog will be out Friday. I'll be recapping some stuff from Chillingham Castle. And, of course, live on the wild side and walk on the edge with us for a little while. You'll love the Edge Radio. Got some great tunes on there. Stream it live, plug it into your car, take it with you, and hook up some other folks with it too, because I think they'll really dig it. All right, again, have a great evening. Join us tomorrow night when Big Johnny Blender's in the house with whiskey, cars, and cigars. And right behind him is my boy Glenn Spillman with another episode of Sports Insider. All right, kiddos, y'all keep it creepy, because you know good and damn well I will. Have a good evening, y'all.